Welcome to the April wrap-up. This is probably going to be a long one. I'm just saying that up front. I mean, not that my videos are ever very short, but I read 17 books this month. I DNF'd one. I read over 6,000 pages. I have never read over 6,000 pages in a month. Period. End of story. I accomplished a lot of the goals that I had. Did I read everything that was on the TBR? No, but I read 17 things, and a lot of them were on my physical TBR, and I feel good about it. A lot of them were arcs. So per usual, I do have things split into categories, and I am going to try and point you to videos and vlogs and Friday reads where I might talk about some things more in detail so that this doesn't get astronomically long, but it's just going to be as long as it's going to be. And I will have timestamps down below and links down below. And let's get into it. So we're going to start with a category that I'm just calling short fiction or short works, because I read a few novellas, I read some short stories, I read a lot of short things, and that felt like a good category to go into because I do feel like you are looking, or at least I look for different things in short fiction than I do long fiction. The first one I read this month was Bloody Summer by Carmen Maria Machado, so this was a while ago, 30 days ago, and I remember being really jarred by this one because it's written so like a researched piece of work, like an article, that for a while I'm like, wait, is this true or not? Like, when is the story? And the story itself, like the structure of it, is someone writing a research piece, citing their sources, discussing what happened in this town in Pennsylvania, and kind of this like dark folklore tale of children becoming tigers and committing a massacre. It was interesting. I think I would have had more fun if I like wasn't so confused for like half of this very short story about like, wait, am I being introduced to a concept that we're then going to explore in the short story, or are we making something up from scratch? I just was like very out of my element. I was just thrown into it, which is her style, and that has happened in other short stories I've read for her, like in Her Body and Other Parties, which I love. Oh, I love that short story collection. So it was good. Not my favorite work by her, but an enjoyable time. I also read the short story collection Children of the New World. Overall, I think this is like a 3.5, 4-star short story collection. I don't really have too many things that were like egregiously bad short stories, but I also don't have any like standouts like, oh, I'm going to hold on to this forever. They were all really readable. I enjoyed discussing them with Evie. There were a few that we were both like, I don't know what I just read. And then others where we're like, oh, that was like, that impacted me more than I thought it would. And a lot of these really do follow this theme of kind of near future and looking at how society could change with technology or because of climate disasters. There isn't as much discussion of pandemic because I do believe that this was written in like 2016, so the themes that we think about in 2016 are the political unrest, climate disaster, technology, like those themes in the near future are definitely within this short story collection. Different like types of children too, like not every story is truly following a children of this new future world, but that theme is consistent, and I do like when short story collections have consistent themes that we're exploring from different angles. So it was a good collection. I'm really glad I read it. The writing style is really easy to read. Like the stories fly by. Most of them are truly only 20 to 30 pages, so it's really easy to sit down for, half an hour, the length of a sitcom, read a short story and have some thoughts. Another short work I read, this is the best one, Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. I have now officially read every prose work that is currently published for me to read by N.K. Jemisin. I still need to read her graphic novel, but this was very good. I think this actually is hands down my favorite short story by N.K. Jemisin. I've read her entire How Long Till Black Future Month. I have a vlog for that if you're ever curious about that collection. And yeah, this is a book or short story, whatever you want to call it, that I would for sure point to people to be like, if you want to know if Jemisin's writing style, if her world building style, if her narrative structure is something that will work with you, because she has a very unique way to tell stories, and that just means that some people work with it or don't. This is a very quick, easy, entertaining entry point that I do think actually showcases a lot of what she tends to do in her longer works. I say in my Jemisin guide that I never know if I would actually recommend How Long Till Black Future Month. It's not my favorite Jemisin work by a long shot, and I actually think it's more experimental than a lot of her novels in terms of, well, if you liked that short story, I don't know if you'll like the novel she wrote from it because her writing style and narrative form is very different, Whereas this, it's like, really interesting narrative style of like this sassy AI consciousness being our only voice talking to this other individual. So kind of like Portal 2 or Portal if you've ever played that video game. Lots of very heavy-handed thematic discussion, which she definitely does, but she does it in a way that I like, but I'm not going to pretend that she doesn't have something to say when she tells her stories. And yeah, I really liked it. The audiobook was also fantastic. And the last thing I'll talk about is actually a novella, and that's The Ballad of Black Tom. This is my second Victor LaValle. It won't be my last. I do think I prefer the novel The Changeling more just because it was a novel. I don't think actually there was anything craft-wise done with this novella that was bad. It's just that because it was 110 pages, and I think that's partially because it's inspired by a short story written by Lovecraft. So it was, basically a reimagining or retelling of an already short work is my assumption. But I kind of wanted like 100 more pages. I don't know. I think because it was so short, it doesn't really stick with me, and it didn't really I don't know. I thought the ending was interesting, but it doesn't stick with me either, if that makes sense. Like the parts that I liked were the meandering beginning as we got to know our main character. And then when we have the plot narrative switch, it wasn't a bad story. I just kind of wanted more, if that makes sense. But it is creepy. It's Lovecraftian. It was a good time. So those are all the short works that I read this month. And then I think it makes the most sense to pivot into this next category, which was, I read this in a day. And these are not novellas. These are full-length novels that I read in a day. That doesn't necessarily make them my favorite things of all time, but if you, I guess, are ever looking for books that are really easy to marathon in one sitting, approximately these two will work. The first one's actually the first book that I read of the month that wasn't Summer Sons, right? That was the name of it? No, Bloody Summer. So I read Bloody Summer and this on the same day, and this is The Anomaly. This is a French translation. It's actually, I think, up for a lot of literary awards in France, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the plot devices because this is definitely one of those stories where a lot of the fun is uncovering the plot. It's not very character-driven per se, although you do have a large cast of characters and their troubles are important. But it's definitely one of those stories where a sci-fi thing happens and you're like, what's happening? And then we are unpacking it. It's kind of a unique approach to it in that you kind of get the theories up front once things are revealed, and then you're more looking at repercussions instead of trying to figure out what happened. It has a different focus there. And I do think people who like thriller sci-fi like Blake Crouch's stuff will probably enjoy this, although I have seen some reviews that people felt this was actually not thriller paced. I read it in a day. I was very engaged the entire time. I was like, what is happening? It would have been a fantastic movie. It's that type of plot-driven sci-fi. And this one I enjoyed because it did have a tiny bit more depth thematically and with character work. It's not sticking with me. We discussed it for a book club. We all generally had an enjoyable time. But this will probably not be one of my favorite literary or sci-fi works of the year. But I read it in a day. It was enjoyable. It was entertaining. I had a good time. And the other one is the second book in the Changeling series, Visions of Heat. I was in a car for 4.5 hours, so I just listened to this audiobook, which was a blast. I was nervous because Mara was telling me, just so you know, sometimes people don't really like the first two books. It's the third book where people start to meet one of their favorite characters, and that's when the macro plot picks up. And I liked the first book. Didn't love it, but it was an enjoyable time. In this one, I loved our main characters. I loved the really slow burn development of their relationship and their chemistry. The chemistry for this couple was more believable to me than the previous one. And I don't know, it was a completely entertaining time, which is what I needed as I traveled the hypotenuse of Ohio one of the weekends this month. It's, when you drive through Ohio, there's not a lot to see. There's farms, trees, cows, you needed something to entertain me. So those are all the ones I read in a day. And now we're going to get into some things that are more thematic works. So this is actually, I can't believe I actually read 3 books that are very much similar to this theme of telling the story of females whose stories have not been told. I don't know what I'll label that on the screen here. Originally, I put down queens. Because 2 of them actually kind of have queens in their title. But regardless, I have 3 works that work for this. The first one I read was The Other Einstein, which talks about it's a historical fiction on the life of Einstein's first wife, who was a physicist in her own right. There's a lot of speculation about what she did or did not contribute to his first paper on special relativity, which is kind of the paper, I think, I don't know if it's the paper that got him the Nobel Prize, but it's definitely the paper that got him noticed by a lot of people. I think his Nobel Prize one is actually not that exciting. Not to get onto a physics tangent, it's just, if you're told why he got the Nobel Prize, you'd be like, I don't know what that is, because it's not on his big stuff that people know him for, like E=mc² and stuff. Regardless, this story is about her, and I have had this on my TBR for years, like 7 years, and I was always putting it off because I had already watched the Genius show that already kind of told the untold story or had speculation on her role, and I'm like, there's no way this book's gonna, like, give me a different angle or elaborate or whatever, and it was for me a lot of, like, the same, some differences, obviously, but not different enough. And actually, I thought the actress in the show did a better job of giving me this character than the book did when it was all her first-person point of view. And I also just thought that was so near history. The liberties that were taken in the assumptions about their married life, which we just don't know, were really harsh. I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't, well-founded. I'm sure positive Einstein was not a great husband based off what we do know to this woman, but there were just some things where I'm just like, that's a lot to, like, assume about a person who was alive pretty recently with no facts, if that makes sense, for this historical fiction. So for me, wasn't amazing. I would actually recommend the Genius show over this for her story, because I do think it actually very honestly portrays how crummy he was as a husband, but without actually kind of maybe destroying his character entirely. I don't know how to say it. I just felt gross reading parts of the book, because I'm like, this is like, some people are going to read this and actually think this is what's true, and we just don't know. And I'm not saying I'm pro Einstein, but it's just like, it's so near history. It's like not even 100 years ago. Like, I don't know. It feels weird, and it wasn't that interesting to me. It was fine. Now, these other two are like favorites of the months. They were arcs I read. We'll start with The Siren Queen by Nghi. This is my third Nghi. I have not read The Chosen and the Beautiful. I have no opinions on that. I'm not a Gatsby person. This one, though, I was excited about because I love old Hollywood films. I don't know a lot about old Hollywood, but, like, my grandma and I have watched so many classics. I eat them up. I like the aesthetic and the vibe of it all. And that is what this book brings. This book is, like, all vibes. Like, if you want a really concrete plot, I wouldn't come to this, because the plot is this woman who is Chinese American, wanted to be in Hollywood, and she's telling her story of how she went from being a 12-year-old working at her family's laundromat to being the Siren Queen, and what that entailed and what she had to do. And in this world, it's magical realism, unexplained, unapologetically fantasy and the real world overlap and interchange all the time. So there's some blood magic, there's selling your soul to demons, there are monsters, and it all worked so well for me. This was a weird book in that it took me actually a really long time to read it for how short it is, but I also didn't mind it. It just, every time I picked it up, I was so transported to the atmosphere and the vibe that it was giving me, and I love that vibe, like I said. Like, I'm very big on old Hollywood stuff, and just, like, the themes that were coming off on the page, the representation and how diverse it was. I will want to reread this because it has this thing that a book brings to the table where it provides an atmosphere and a feeling that is so escapist for me. Like, I could just read the sentences and be with the characters and just enjoy it. It felt like a historical fiction, but with the atmosphere of a fantasy book, and that's really honestly where I like it to meet. I don't get that very often. It was really wonderful. That said, if you want plot, if you want fantasy that makes sense, wouldn't pick this up. This is like, if you don't like the vibes that this book's bringing to the table, I don't think you'll like this book. And then my favorite of this category is Kaikeyi, which I have a standalone review for, so I should try not to talk too much, but I really liked that book. Oh, I really, really liked it. Again, it's like the main character is why. Like, Kaikeyi is a wonderful character to follow. This is similar to Siren Queen, where we are following someone think about their life. So again, you're following her from being 12 all the way to when she becomes the vilified queen that she is in the Hindu mythology. And so I don't want to say more than that because I didn't know much more, and I thought it was just kind of fun. I don't think it ruins your time if you actually know more than that. It's just, that was my preference, so I'm just preserving that safe space. And I loved watching her grow up. I thought she matured so well on the page. I was very invested. The writing was wonderful. This is, again, like Siren Queen of Work, where it's just like, I was where the setting was. I felt the atmosphere. I was enjoying my time whenever I was reading the book. Like, it was a snuggle up in a blanket and get lost book, which I really appreciate. So that was that section. And I believe I have 2 more sections, and this next one's a big one, but I had these themes just show up over and over and over again. And this is like a study of society and resistance and change, that sort of angle. And it's all from different angles, but like these were main plot points of the books. I have Shadow of the Short Days, which is straight up a rebellion story. This one unfortunately didn't really work for me. I really liked the beginning when we have this kind of interesting high fantasy contemporary setting. I'm getting to know my characters and the races of the world and how the magic's working. I was enjoying that. And then plot things happened. And basically once a few plot things happened, it was really hard for me to be as connected to my main characters. And I think it's because of these plot things, it kind of pivoted from high fantasy rebellion story to rebellion grimdark story. And I don't think I expected that. And so I went from having characters I was rooting for to characters that I was observing and didn't know how to feel about, and I didn't really like them, and then a lot of dark, weird things were happening, and I still don't know how to feel about the ending, and it was a bit long. Like, if you like grimdark, I actually think you should try this out. I'm just not a big grimdark reader. Like, how often do I talk about grimdark books on this channel? Not very. It's not something I gravitate towards. So I think it's because I didn't know that it wasn't the right book for me. But if, like, you are craving a fantasy book with inspiration from Icelandic cultures and you like grimdark things, I think you should try this out, because the writing was fine. I actually never was upset with what characters were doing. I think they all made sense based off the motivations I was given. I just wanted to be able to root for them a bit more. That's my personal preference. The next one we'll talk about is The City Inside. This is another arc that I read this month for Tor.com. So this is a different take on a resistance story. We are near future India. It's an anti-dystopian work. And so what's happening is we are following 2 characters, and it's kind of slice of life in this anti-dystopian near future, where one of them is essentially a producer for a huge influencer, like not dissimilar to YouTube influencers or things like that. And the other one is part of a rich family, but it's like kind of the black sheep that no one talks about, and ends up getting a job with this family friend. And you are following them as they struggle with how society is and their places in it. And then you see near the end how they choose to resist. So it's not completely about resistance, but it is an analysis of where society is at and how people respond to society. And it's really eye-opening. I think it does a better job of what 1984 was trying to do. And I know that's like a big thing for me to say, but I'm thinking of 1984 is a dystopian work that is about, surveillance, really hyper-analyzing people, and what does that do to society and the individual. And we have a very similar circumstance here, and I do actually think, based off what we know now, this is the more natural progression. I really liked it. It's definitely literary sci-fi. If you don't like authors that play around with sentences and have fun with their authorial voices, you might not like this. It worked for me, but it does have a writing style that is probably going to make or break your reading experience. It is not one of those invisible writing styles. The author, has a distinct voice that worked for me, and I do think because it's not super plot driven, like I said, it's pretty slice of life. There are some moments of tension, but in general, you're kind of just watching this near future thought experiment, and that really works for me. I actually really like that in my anti-dystopian sci-fi works. This next one's Children of Time, and I'm putting this here because actually the whole thought experiment of Children of Time is the evolution of societies, both human and spider. And I won't get into too much, but I really liked that question and how we were answering that question from both sides, the similarities, the differences, what happens at moments of change, because we're looking at generations, and there are moments of change for those of you who have not heard of Children of Time. Oh, the plot of it. So, what happens at the beginning is humans are trying to create more life on other planets, and there's a virus they made to do that, and things went wrong. And so, instead of apes, spiders get infected with the virus, and so on this planet, we kind of get to see how spiders evolve with this evolution-inducing virus, and then also we get to see the repercussions of the things that went wrong on the human half of the equation. And eventually, these paths intersect, and we get to see how that pays off. I enjoyed this. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I do think the whole the motivation of the story with the virus was a great way to start the thought experiment, but it was the hardest thing for me to like hold on to as someone with a pretty strong biomedical background. I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna forget about it. But then the story at the end, I didn't like how the ending worked. I didn't hate it. Obviously my rating here is still very good, but I don't think I need more books with this thought experiment. I thought it was a great exploration of it right here, so I probably won't get to Children of Ruin anytime soon, the sequel, and I know the third book's coming out, so I guess maybe if people are like, the third book's the best thing ever, I'll read the next two. But I really enjoyed this. I want to read more Adrian Tchaikovsky. It was a good time. I actually really enjoyed the focus on societal changes and the scientific answers they had to questions. It was a good time, and I do highly recommend the audiobook because there is a lull in pacing in the middle. And I think the audiobook really helps you push through that. It gets really like exposition heavy, like info dumpy even for me, and we all know I love info dumps. Like I love a good info dump. It's not a negative for me. It's a thing I like. Sometimes I just want to know about the world. I just give it to me. And here I think it got a little too heavy about that in the middle. But with the audiobook, it just flew by. It was a really good narrator. Next one I'll talk about is Infomocracy. And this is, I don't know how far future, but future Earth. And democracy is done on a global scale, very different. Every, I think, 100,000 people has a sentinel, and you vote for a government, and however many sentinels have the same government, you get a supermajority, and we are on the eve of the next supermajority deciding election. And so this is on this, not necessarily because of the resistance angle, but because of this like observation of society and what this issue brings up, the pros and the cons. And it's definitely done more through like a spy espionage lens, because we're on the eve of a major election. The chances of nothing going wrong, that wasn't happening. And I buddy read this with my friend Shannon from That's So Po, and we both had a rough time at the start. The start was slow. The start was like, what's happening? Do I care? And then it really picked up. I think I got really connected to my characters once they were interacting with each other, and I was really invested in the story. I do want to finish the trilogy. I liked the thought experiment, and I thought it was a pretty good implementation of this kind of more action-based, like, this would be an action movie plot. Like, this would be like something like Bourne Identity or something. Like, it doesn't have the tropes of Bourne Identity, but that type of movie, it felt like that type of experience. And it was interesting seeing how the technology worked with this, why we got to this spot. Like I said, it did what I like sci-fi to do, which was like, here's my thought experiment, and here are characters and then a plot you care about, and we're also going to unpack this thought experiment. It had a lot of that mixed together in a way that I really appreciated. And for those of you who don't like series, this worked as a standalone. Like, you could stop after this book. I want to keep going because there was a character in this book that I know is going to be the main character in the second book, and I'm like, yes, I really liked when that character was introduced. So that's just me. Next one is one that I read for my Tor.comathon vlog, which I'll have linked in case you want more thoughts. And that's Docile. This was a very controversial book when it came out, and I still don't know what star rating I've given it. This was a very consumable read. I read this tome in 2 days. It was very dark, and also it's left my head completely. So I don't think it's a book where, for me, the themes were so revelatory that it stayed with me. Like, I very much agreed with the themes. Like, I don't know. It was very easy to be like, yeah, slavery's bad, capitalism's bad, this power dynamic is awful. Like, those are not difficult things for me to deal with. And I did like how there's a plot pivot point halfway through that changes the focus of the story, and I appreciated that change in focus because the first half is hard because you graphically are looking at this really bad power dynamic between this rich man and his newly acquired docile, which is basically someone who goes into indentured servitude, and apparently in this world, anything can be done to you, and normally you take this drug so you don't remember this time in your life, but this drug has had side effects, so this person's choosing not to. And so it's just a very punishingly dark book. Its world building is not strong. It's definitely more like one of those dystopian world buildings where the thought experiment is the only level of the world building. We don't talk about how we get here. We don't actually really even talk about how it works in the now. We're just like, this is how it works in our very small isolated circumstance, and we're going to look at this. And I thought for the relationship interaction, the book explored that in depth enough for me. But everything else was kind of like, I didn't notice it, and then when I read negative reviews, I'm like, oh yeah, I agree. I didn't think about it, but I agree. So I don't know. I don't dislike that I read it, because I don't read things this dark that often, so it's like interesting to like get into that side of fiction. But also, I don't know who to recommend this to, or when is it worth recommending. I know that because of this, I want to read more by this author, although the next book also looks very dark, because I liked the writing style, and I don't have many trans authors that I read from. But this is a book that if someone told me they hated it, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I understand. It's definitely dealing with topics that are just going to be polarizing. And I don't think the execution was done poorly, but I don't think it was done perfectly either, which is, I think, why you can get such a wide range of emotional responses to this work. And the last one for this section is Master of Poisons. And this one was like a really cool environmental high epic fantasy secondary world, which I don't think I consume that often. And the focus really truly was on the land is going to not be sustainable in the way we're using it. And it's not even from, per se, an industrial lens point or anything like that. And I mean, we've had those themes before. I mean, that's a huge thing in Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. But for me, I really appreciated this standalone work and how it approached that theme. That's probably my favorite part about it. And we have our two characters, Jola and Ewa, and their age difference is huge, and one of them is currently trying to get people in their government to see his action plan and be like, we have to do things now. We need to listen to our indigenous people that we have brought into this empire and adjust how we're doing it so we can figure out how to solve our problem while not currently still destroying things. And obviously everyone listened and the book ended after 100 pages, right? No, that's not what happened. And then Ewa has these special powers where she can go to this kind of spiritual plane. And it has so much magic that I still to this moment do not understand, but it was very transportive and I really enjoyed it. I love how there were character perspectives from the land, from the animals. Like, it is a book with very strong themes on indigenous culture and really using that to actually create policies. But that said, it's a lot of plot in 500 pages that also doesn't feel very fast, and I don't know how that's going to work for some people. Like, we span like decades in 500 pages. And so sometimes some big moments happen in a paragraph. And other times you'll be like, why are we focusing on this small moment for pages? So I think there's going to be pacing discrepancies between people. Pick this up if you like literary fiction, I think. You'll actually have a better time with it as long as you're okay with just magic stuff happening. Like, as a seasoned fantasy reader, I don't know how anything works, and I don't think that was the point. The point was kind of magic wasn't the solution, but could do cool things, and I was vibing with it, if that makes sense. I think I only really dislike soft magic if suddenly magic is just used as solutions all the time. And I don't think that's how it came across here. It was more just like whimsical folklore magic, and then also awesome sorcerer magic, but none of it was explained to me. I never got an info dump about that. So if you ever get gripes about info dumps, that doesn't exist here. So there you go. But I really liked it. The audiobook was also really great and helpful because it definitely felt like a story to be told. And I do think if you're like me and was someone who wanted to like Black Leopard, Red Wolf, because you wanted a high epic secondary world fantasy based on African culture, and that book was just too dark and a little too literary, I think this is the good solution. Because A, it's only one book, and I think it gave me everything I thought I was going to get based off the marketing of Black Leopard, Red Wolf. And like I said, it's standalone. I think I do want to reread it. The map at the beginning of the book is very pretty. And I can just already tell that on rereads I'll get more out of it. And I do think it's my thematic connection that makes up for some of the other stuff that don't work as well for me. Like the characters are a little more distant for me than I like, which is similar to this type of subgenre of classic high fantasy literary. Like, if you like Lord of the Rings, you might actually really get on with this, is what I'm saying. So, anyways, that's everything for that category. I guess I'll briefly mention, because it would have fit in this category, I think, is I did DNF The Justice of Kings. I got 50% of the way through. I talk about it in a Friday Reads. It's just that this was a kind of low magic, kind of grimmer, dark fantasy with a murder mystery plot arc with characters that I was not connecting with. I don't think the character work was bad. I don't think the writing was bad, but I did say in my TBR that in order for me to like this based off the other tropes that are not my buzzwords, I would need to like the writing style and the characters quite a bit. And those were actively things that were bothering me more than the tropes that normally bother me. And that's why I stopped. It was just not the book for me. Has no representation on if the book's good or bad. Just not my thing. And the last category are kind of essentially, it's my faves, but I'm just calling it Ride or Die. Like, especially because like the characters in these books are my children. Like, must protect at all costs. I reread Middle Game by Shannon McGuire. I love Middle Game. That is, for me, one of the coziest rereads. And I know it's kind of a dark book about alchemy and like gruesome things kind of happen. But Roger and Dodger, I'm ride or die for them. I think part of it is, like with every book, you bring your own experiences to it, and I hyper-identify with Dodger. One of my best friends, to me, represents Roger, and, like, the whole idea, like, the metaphor of how you come in and out of people's lives, and how when it's truly, like, one of your best friends, it does not matter how long or how far apart you have been, really resonated with me. I just love the story, and even knowing what would happen, I was just still so, like, tense. So it's one of my favorite books. I wish it had a better cover. I really don't like the cover, and I do think the cover, although I get why it's the cover that it is, makes the wrong people pick the book up, because I don't think it's dark academia. I don't think it's this vibe. This is not it. But I love that, and then this next one is The House of Always, the last book that I read this month. And if you don't know at this point, this is the 4th Chorus of Dragons book. I am obsessed with this series. I'm literally, after I finish this video, going to pick up the 5th book because I need to know what's going to happen, because I love all of these characters so much. And this book actually had a focus on some of our side characters that we've been introduced to through the series, more so than our main 3, which my main 3 are like my I am ride or die. But then I remembered some of my other ones. I'm like, oh, this is so sweet. Oh, I just want to protect you. Like, the character connection that I have in this series, like, I love it. This one is a group therapy session. Essentially, like, if you read the Stormlight Archive and you're someone who's like, I just want all these characters to work on their mental health stuff, have therapy, I think the series does a really good job of, like, recognizing that humans are very complex and everything like that, and actually dealing with those things. Like, I feel like characters are forced to, through circumstances, actually confront situations that they avoid, because a lot of characters are, like, experts in avoiding everything. I don't know. I love this series. I don't think this is my favorite book because, again, it doesn't focus on my faves. But that said, I still read this 500-page book in like 3 days. So, what am I going to say? That I didn't like it? No, I really liked it. And, still the reveals. So good. And another book where, like, with the magic of this world, I would definitely say it's more mid-magic, like soft to mid. Like, it's not a hard magic system, although there are rules, but we don't know all the rules. And also, though, even though we have this flexibility, it never feels like magic is too convenient, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's more in line with, like, the coolness and the complexity of magic in Malazan Book of the Fallen, but without the philosophy and writing density of that series, if that makes sense. So if you were, like, ever curious about, like, the epicness of that series, I mean, this is way more straightforward written style. Like, it's nothing thematically like Malazan Book of the Fallen. But if you just, like, want dragons and lots of cool sorcery and magic and, like, basically all the magic, it's great. It's great. I love this series. I cannot wait to finish it and just keep raving about it for the rest of the year to get you guys to pick up this series. And that's the wrap up. That's all the things. This video could have been longer, but I think it's okay. This seems reasonable for 17 books. And yeah, I'm hoping to not read this many in May because I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think so. Like, I purposefully did not watch as much TV or play as many video games so I can get through these books, and I would like to reincorporate those hobbies. If you want to leave an emoji, ooh, is there a Kraken emoji or like a sea monster emoji? I want that one because that's like The House of Always, which is the last book I talked about. Feel free to tell me your hits or misses of the month. How did you do if you participated in any readathons? I got all of the prompts done for the magical readathon. I did it. And yeah, that's it for this one. Like, if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.